Hello, hi everyone. Welcome to ZICO's webinar number 2, part 2 of the COVID status update from our ASEAN offices. We had a very successful webinar last week with more than 20 countries and 180 participants. And today again, we have, I think about now 22 countries and close to 200 participants for today's webinar that we will be talking to our leaders from Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, and Thailand. All the managing partners are on Teams, and I thank you for joining us at this virtual roundtable. Some housekeeping rules. There is a prompt of Q&A, so if you could click that, when you think of questions along the way, we have a team that's collecting the questions, and we will then I will pose them to my colleagues to respond to you. We have separated the session to two parts. The first one is on country status, what's happening on the ground at the CLMVT countries. And the second part of the webinar will be discussing on client issues, issues around force majeure, supply contracts, employment, issues around markets, stimulus. So we'll try to condense and get everyone talking all within, say, 45 minutes with a Q&A, so we'll close it up at 1 o'clock Singapore time. ASEAN, ZICO Law, ASEAN is the, ZICO Law is the only network of law firm with 10 country presence in all ASEAN states with 18 offices, and we're all working from home, and we're very happy to be connecting with you today on this virtual roundtable. Without much further ado, I would like to call on my colleague Matthew Randall from our ZICO Law Cambodia, where we have offices in both Phnom Penh and Siem Reap. Matthew, to share with us what's the situation currently in Cambodia.
Thank you, Hanim. Yeah, thank you, Hanim. Good afternoon, everybody. Cambodia, in terms of numbers of infections, has been fairly light. I think as of today, we're at about 117 infections. 60 of those have been recovered, no fatalities, which is all good news. The government action has been, their general philosophy here is to keep business going as much as possible. So they did close schools early on in the piece. That was one of the first actions that were taken. But what they've done is they've closed establishments where there's large gatherings of people. So KTVs, casinos, clubs, concert halls, museums, cinemas, that sort of thing. But what they've done is they've allowed, and they've been fairly adamant about this, is they've allowed restaurants, cafes, etc. To remain open. So that's all still going on as business as usual. In terms of entries into the country, they initially started by preventing travellers from countries that are infected, Italy, USA, etc., etc. What they've done now is you cannot get visas on arrival at all. Anybody entering the country now has to get a visa approved by the Cambodian embassy before entering the country. You'll be required to show a certificate of non-infection. You'll be required to get, I think, $50,000 in medical insurance before you're allowed to enter. And I've heard, as of yesterday, I'm still trying to confirm this, that now they're also imposing a 14-day quarantine for new arrivals. So basically, they prevented incoming traffic as much as possible. In terms of leaving the country, just from a practical measure, there's just not many flights. I know that a number of expat groups, the British, Australians, etc., now having to organise their own planes to leave the country. It's very expensive now. So just as a practical measure, I think it's very difficult to get any flights. I think that's the same with most countries. There's been no shutdown per se. What they've done as of yesterday is cancel Khmer New Year public holidays, which was quite a large step. The Khmer New Year, of course, will continue, but all businesses will continue to operate as if it's not a public holiday. So that's been cancelled. They will move that back to sometime after this virus has passed by adding another public holiday on, and then allocating days. I think that's anybody's guess when that will be. Some other measures the government's taken is, as a whole, the government is open for business. So the courts are open, the government institutions are open. They're encouraging as much online applications as possible. They're trying to limit face-to-face meetings, etc., for obvious reasons. They've encouraged the National Bank to work with the banks to work with their customers on loans, for example, in certain areas about maybe deferring repayments of loans, deferring repayments of principal, etc., in those hard-hit areas, tourism, manufacturing, etc. They're also encouraging landlords and tenants to negotiate with regard to leases. Of course, that's a big issue right now, but the government itself is not making any directives per se, so nothing's going into law. The biggest thing at the moment is that everybody has seen a draft state of emergency law. So we're waiting for that to be passed. That will be any day now. What the government is doing there basically is equipping itself with the necessary powers to take action if need be going forward. So you can assume that this will be done for reasons of if there are mass gatherings, if there are protests, etc., anticipating that type of thing. If they, for some reason, need to close down establishments, this will give them the power to do that. So my understanding is they will pass this law and they will have it at the ready in the event they need to use it anytime going forward. But in terms of business, it's business as usual. I'm actually not there for reason of the COVID virus itself. I'm in Australia. I came for a scheduled trip here on the 15th of March, meant to be for 10 days, have not been able to leave the country. Various reasons for that, of course. You've got to, not just the country you're going to, can you transit through certain countries, etc. So that's as a result, business has been impacted by that. But our business, what we're doing in Cambodia is we're operating partly from home, partly in the office. We've got split team arrangement. So it's business as usual. I haven't noticed a drop off in any business, to be honest. Actually, we seem to be doing as much work as we were before. It's all being done remotely in a sense. Of course, there's no face-to-face meetings. I think we've had one or two. But the building we're in, the Maybank building, they apply stringent measures with regard to the COVID-19 virus. So there's temperature taken for every entry to the building. There's hand washing, sanitizers everywhere. So we're of course implementing all that. So on the odd occasion we have had face-to-face meetings, those measures have been implemented. Within the office, of course, there's social distancing. So we're separating those in the office from working with each other, close to each other. And on the whole, everything is being done by remote video conferencing, things of this nature. So it's business as usual. The vast majority of our clients are overseas anyway. So on the whole, most of our business is done remotely, as you could say. So there's been no change, no impact on the business per se. But we are ready in the event that the government implements a shutdown, which they're indicating they're not going to. But if they did, then we've set up, from a technical point of view, everybody has been set up to be able to operate solely from home. So we put VPNs on computers. We've done all this sort of thing. For in the event that no one's allowed to access the office. But at the moment, it's business as usual in terms of the firm where we're operating. On the streets, it's pretty much business as usual. The restaurants, the cafes are still open, but we haven't had any drastic increase in infections. So I think if that occurred, maybe there'll be some further implementation of further actions. But at this stage, it's lighter than most countries.
Sounds, yeah. Thank you, Matthew. Sounds like early days yet for Cambodia. I don't know, am I live, Adriel? Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Matthew. Sounds like it's still early days in Cambodia in terms of the peak. And so, what we've seen in some of the offices while we continue business as usual, or, remote working for some of our employees is not easy. Our lawyers, they don't have Wi-Fi at home, and those kind of constraints where they have to come in to work, and that could be very difficult in some of these emerging markets. We moved now to Laos. Our partner there, managing partner Aristotle David, tell us what's the condition on the ground in Vientiane, Aris?
Thank you, Hanin. Hello, everyone from Vientiane, Laos. Well, for the government, it has established the National Task Force Committee for the Prevention and Control of COVID to tackle this. And insofar as the statistics, as of yesterday, there are 14 confirmed infections, 11 of which are in Vientiane and 3 in Luang Prabang. There are no reported deaths yet, and all confirmed infections are confined with the government hospitals. Now, to combat this COVID infections, the government has issued several series of regulations. First of which is the restriction of movement of people. So on 23 March, they closed initially domestic borders, but have expanded it to include international borders. They've also suspended all visa issuance. And for citizens which has visa exemptions, they've also canceled it. Initially, inbound travelers are required to have health certificates and have to self-quarantine, isolate within 14 days. And now international borders are all closed and domestic flights are canceled because most of the flights from Vientiane transit through Thailand or Vietnam or in other infected countries in Southeast Asia. So now technically there's no flights except for repatriation of expats which are arranged by embassies. Since 23 March, all schools have been closed temporarily until further notice as well, and all entertainment establishments and gatherings are not allowed. Hotels, restaurants are allowed to continue operations, but they're only for takeaway and delivery services. Hotels, they can also accept guests, but they are required to have preventive measures implemented and limit guests. Weddings, meetings, religious events, seminars, and activities are all prohibited. And if, for example, there are required to have 10 or more persons to meet, such as for funerals or death ceremonies, they have to get permissions or like implement preventive measures. Preventive measures like physical distancing of about 2 meters and wearing a face mask, hand sanitizers, and the rest. Now, one of the main legislations which is effective from 30 March is that there are restrictions for traveling outside for everyone. So all government staffs are required to work from home from 1 to 11 April and thereafter observe the Lao New Year holiday. Lao New Year, as similar to the rest of the other countries, is a big event. So well, they haven't postponed it, but no gatherings are allowed. You can go to temples to do offerings and exercise preventive measures. All essential government personnel are still required to do their work. Everyone is required to stay at home except for performing certain activities, like, for example, purchasing goods, going to the hospitals, or going to the banks. Essential businesses such as banks, financial institutions, stock exchange, securities companies, hospitals, health centers, pharmacies, postal, electricity, water, waste collection, supermarkets, and fuel stations are allowed to continue operations. All factories are closed. Mining and hydropower factories are also required to comply with these regulations. For the banking and financial sectors, the Bank of Laos has issued incentives to commercial banks so that they can postpone due dates for repayment and payment of interest. And they also encourage them to give new credits to other customers and allowed an exemption on the debt classification and refinancing restrictions. The Ministry of Finance also has extended the deadline for financial report until 30 April. Ministry of Finance, although requires the collection and filing of tax for salaries of their employees, they can do e-filing and payment by mobile banking and online banking. Unfortunately, for government offices, they have no set e-filing system yet, except for the tax. For industry sectors, they have granted exemptions from the payment of profit tax for 3 months, April to June, and also exemptions on duty-free and import fees for certain items which are going to be listed by the authorities. For certain provinces, like in Luang Prabang, they have suspended the filing of enterprise registrations and renewals. Transportation, passenger transportation is all restricted except for consumer goods or food and essential personnel. For the courts, they have required their staff to work from home and provided a skeleton of staffing with the different levels of the court. On the labor sector, it has granted exemptions on salary tax of employees earning $555 and less for 3 months, April to June, and postponement of social security contributions from April and June. Utilities are still being considered on whether there are adjustments on payments. And for the tourism sector, there's a postponement of taxes for tourism business operators for 3 months as well. That's all I need for now.
Thank you, Aris. I think that's very comprehensive, and it sounds like the government have been busy passing on all these measures, to try to curb this, the effect of this pandemic in Vientiane. We now move to our third of the CLMVT countries, Myanmar, the kind of largest states of the CLMVT, Myanmar with nearly 60 million population and borders China. We have a partner on the ground, Geraldine. Can you share with us, Geraldine, what's the mood and what's the update in Yangon?
Okay, thanks, Hanim. So Myanmar was actually one of the later countries to actually announce positive cases. As of today, basically about 1,300 people have been tested, but positive cases are only in the early 20 numbers, about 22 with 2 deaths. That has actually been quite a strange number because, as you've said, Myanmar is such a highly populous country. It's got 60 million people, and only 22 infections is something that a lot of people think is questionable. Mostly, the mood is that there haven't been enough tests that were conducted because Myanmar at that time, the early days, didn't have the capabilities to actually conduct those tests. In recent times, some of its partners, for example, Singapore, Korea, Japan, these are some of the Myanmar's largest trade partners have donated test kits. Even then, some are of the view that it is not sufficient. What we've seen then is some embassies have actually advised their citizens to leave. In fact, some of the European countries have actually sent evacuation flights. So other than that, what's happened on the ground in terms of government is firstly, they declared it as an infectious disease. There is actually a law in Myanmar regarding this, which is the Prevention and Control of Communicable Disease Law. So what they've done is actually declared it to be an infectious disease, and following from that, a series of measures were then put into place. The President's office made that announcement on the 13th of March after WHO's declaration on the 11th. A central committee of coronavirus disease was formed. Thereafter, a task force was also formed in March to actually handle the containment and emergency response committee. So what's interesting there is that committee is actually led by the Vice President as opposed to the military, because the military is the one that's empowered under the emergency national security measures. But that task force is interesting because it's indicative of the government wanting to ensure that it retains its power there. Notwithstanding that Myanmar has actually some history, being that the Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Defense, and Labor and Immigration and Population are actually retained as military ministries since Myanmar opened up. So on the ground, similar to what we've heard from Laos and Cambodia, there are actually restricted movements orders that have been put into place, but not on a national level. On a union level, the Yangon state government has actually announced from the 10th to the 19th that there will be the Water Festival celebrations basically is supposed to have happened in this period, similar to Laos and Cambodia being its new year. So That's been cancelled. They've actually banned all celebrations, festivals, activities. This was announced quite early on by the Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, State Councillor herself, to say that Tinjan events will be cancelled, and thereafter implementive measures were put into place by each regional or state government. So in Yangon, being the capital, it's basically, sorry, it's not, it's a commercial capital. Basically, that's what they've done. Restaurants are still open, but with limited service. There's takeaway. They're not allowing people to eat in there. Of course, there's been some which have been flouting the regulations, but what's interesting is the government is keeping a very tight lid on this. They have actually gone and picked people up for not adhering to home quarantine. Home quarantines measures were put into place in late March till now, mostly to deal with actually returning migrant workers. There was actually an influx of some 24,000 returning migrant workers who have come from the borders. As you said, Myanmar borders, China and Thailand, basically the main border where the migrant workers have come back. Some of these migrant workers have not actually adhered to the home quarantine. And we've seen drastic measures where some of these migrant workers did not adhere. They've been picked up by the ministry, and thereafter the surrounding areas were also then put on lockdown. So if your neighbor is a returning migrant worker that didn't adhere to the home quarantine, that particular area would then be sort of cordoned and sealed off for a lockdown. We've seen actually some experiences of that from our own staff actually in certain areas where people have not actually adhered to those quarantine measures. Government offices wise, they are still BAU, business as usual. They are open. What they've done is to limit their operations. For example, they've asked that 50% of government staff operate work from home. So the government themselves are actually implementing preventive measures in that sense that they're not allowing visitors or external people to come into their offices. So some key ministries that this may have some effect is the foreign direct investment ministries, the company house, because most of that, a lot of submissions of documents happen physically. So we expect that perhaps there would be a slowdown of processing of some of these applications on the economic front. There's been also a closure of courts. The courts have been closed since the 25th of March. The Supreme Court has issued adjournment notice to all cases that were supposed to have been held between the 25th of March to the 9th of April. The 10th officially in Myanmar is when the Water Festival public holiday starts. So that is still on. They, in the sense that they have not cancelled the public holiday, but they have said that there will be no celebrations allowed. In that sense, what else is important is financially, the government has announced stimulus packages. They have announced a stimulus package. They've set aside 100 billion Myanmar kyats. That's equivalent to about 700 million US dollars to be made as SME loans at very low interest rate of 1%. These are intended to actually support the directly affected industries. Mainly, one major industry is actually the garments industry. Myanmar is one of the garment export countries, cut-made pack. So that type of businesses would be eligible. Of course, hotels and tourism companies, and definitely SMEs. The threshold for SMEs, there is a definition of how you can qualify for the loan. So the government has actually set aside such financial stimulus packages in that sense. The next thing is some tax relief. There is tax relief, again, mostly centered around those industries. It's not a broad-based tax cut. It is actually based on eligibility criteria. On the employment front, there is also some support because actually some of these garment factories have been affected since the China period, where China was under a lockdown. A lot of garments had closed down because they couldn't get raw materials. Now that China is restarting, but they've lost their export markets because Europe is now under lockdown. So the most affected sectors currently would actually be the garments industry. So the Labour Department has announced some kind of relief based on social security benefits that have been given. So there is actually certain criteria fixed in terms of awarding these benefits. Yes, so other than that, on our office, basically we're doing a work from home, and it's actually similar to what Matt has said. We haven't seen a slowdown in business. I think because Myanmar does have a lot of transactions with China, so we've seen actually an increase in our China-related briefs, which are now really going into full swing in continuing their transactions.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Geraldine.
Thank you,
I think that's a comprehensive update, and you know, I think for a country to introduce stimulus packages of more than $700 million, I think that's really quite bold, and I commend the government for doing so. Moving on to the next country, I think I'm cognizant of time. Also, would like to remind our attendees. I believe we have close to 200 attendees, to please pose your questions at the Q&A chat button, and our presenters will attend to them either individually or we'll collect them for discussion at the end of this webinar. Thailand now, we have Connie there, who's our corporate partner. Not quite an emerging economy, a more developed economy. What 50th most largest country, most populous. So how's it going? I think Songkran, I hear, has been cancelled, just like all the other countries with coming up with festivities. Connie, share with us what's the mood on the ground.
Hi, hello. Yeah, so far I think the ground at the moment is quite similar to other CLMV country. The government just made an announcement since last month that we're gonna do the cancellation of our Songkran or Thai New Year's. This is because we kind of like try to avoid the traveling, transporting of the people, and also so far in general. Our confirmed case at the moment is 2,258 since yesterday, but however, they have quite a positive news, because like in the last 2 weeks, our confirmed case approximately increased 100 cases a day, but in the last 2 days is quite decline. Like on Monday is declined to like 58 cases, and until yesterday is 38 cases. Is quite a good news, and then is quite impact the stock market at the moment, because like in the last 3 weeks is sharply dropped, and a bit swing, but yesterday is quite the market is quite raised to 76 point in the stock market. And so far on the ground, we still have some what we call semi-lockdown, not like a full lockdown like Malaysia or other country. So the semi-lockdown is actually start from Bangkok. It's just really applied to some business activity, like for example the shopping mall. That one is under the order that they have to close down. But however, for the supermarket, pharmacy, or like restaurant, that actually still operate normally. But however, for the restaurant, you can do just only takeaway. You cannot eat in, and so far I can say that the logistic activity or logistic business is quite good, and also for the e-commerce like Lazada, Shopee, that one is quite a good benefit, compared to other activity. And early this month we just have the curfew, but it's still not the full curfew at the moment. From 10 p.m. until 4 a.m. in the morning, we cannot traveling, just stay at home. And like last 2 days, they just have the rumor that government probably will implement 24-hour curfew like everyone cannot go out of their press. But however, they have the announcement that okay, the government will keep watching the confirmed case, and if the people give the coordination, like for example, not traveling, do the work from home, and also the case is reduced, the 24-hour curfew probably not be implemented. And also another thing, there is the commercial flight ban to Thailand. It starts since 4 April, and initially when the first announcement, it will be in between 4 to 6, but now, however, it will be extended until 18 April. And after 18 April, just only the repatriation can be come to Thailand. And also for the movement is not restricts for you to traveling to another province, but however they have some restriction that okay, if you go back to your hometown, you need to do the quarantine for 14 days, something like that. So for some issue is quite take some more burden to the people who traveling back to their hometown. So some people like just decide to stay here in Bangkok. And for the office building, now it still can be operated. Like me today, I'm still come to the office to do the webinar. But I can say that 50% of neighborhood is not coming, it's kind of like 50-50 people come to work. And also for the MRT, BTS, SkyTrain underground still operate normally. But for the government sector, the governments try to implement the work from home policy as well. But for the sector that they need to provide service to the people, like court or Department of Business Development thing, that one actually still they probably have time to open, like for they now open every Tuesday and Thursday, something like that. And for our Bangkok office now, we also implement the work from home policy because we just like avoid any outbreaking at the moment, and we couldn't see any difficulty. We still have a lot of going on work. We can say that it's quite busy, and also for the investment, we're still working on some due diligence project that they will take over some Thai company here, and also for some company that they would like to set up a company here in Thailand to operate the company here. That deal still is going on, yeah. And I think now for Chinese client, I think they are on recovery. They're quite active at the moment. Yeah, that.
That's very encouraging that it's still busy, and please be careful being in the office and don't forget your mask and the social distancing. If you say 50-50, still people quite busy in Bangkok. Let's move to our ASEAN tiger, Vietnam, with more than 100 million population, large market. Feng is our managing partner, speaking from Hanoi. Feng, how are you doing? What's it like over there on the ground?
Okay, hi everybody. Actually, every morning we all of the citizens of Vietnam receive an announcement or notice from the Ministry of Health. According to which they confirm how many cases, is new case. And today, on the 8th of April, we had the total 253 confirmed case, and then in week, 122 cases recovered. Then this morning we have to 6K until now. The government of Vietnam had they have a very quick action to deal with COVID-19. They issue the two directive 15 and 16 under which all nationwide social distancing had been applied for a period of 15 days, starting from the 1st April 2020 and ending on 15 April 2020. For the time being, this is the key measure to cope with COVID-19. Further to Directive 15 and 16, the Prime Minister issued decision 447, according to which COVID-19 had been announced as national pandemic, and then all the regulation of the government had to apply. According to this regulation, voluntary implementation of social distancing on family unit and social unit basis. Factories are required to ensure the safety distance, face mask wearing, and disinfection rule. It means that the worker can go to work, but the employer have to make sure that they keep their workers safe. People are required to stay at home and should not go outside except for essential circumstances. For example, purchase of food, medicine, other essential goods and services, and to attend the medical emergency need or medical examination and treatment, and to work at the state agency or unit, armed force, diplomatic agency, factory and facility that provide essential service and goods, and other emergency circumstances. Compulsory minimum 2 meter distance among the people is required. Gathering in group in more than people outside the office, school, hospital, public place, and gathering activity, even of more than 20 people in a room, are prohibited. Okay, so accordingly, recently we stay at home. The state agency are required to make sure that information technology to implement working from home regime and encourage virtual meeting. Public passenger transportation activity mainly suspend. We cannot go by taxi and something like that. They are all not working. Travel from virus hit area to other city and provinces are banned except for the essential reason, such as delivery of food and transporting of the worker and material for production. Entry to main border gate and secondary border gate for traveler along the border between Vietnam and Laos and Vietnam Cambodia from the 1st April 2020 is temporarily suspended. Entry of traveler through international border gate along the land boundary are strictly controlled. Traveler from Laos and Cambodia will subject to 14 quarantine. Insurance companies are requested not to introduce and offer any insurance policy relating to COVID-19 disease because medical treatment is being provided free of charge by the government. And the most interesting thing is that to combat with the wide spread of COVID-19, National Office of Intellectual Property had also issued a new notification on 1st March on the timeline for filing application or transaction between NOIP of Vietnam and applicant during COVID-19. Under this notification, NOIP has extended on the deadline falling between 13 March 2020 to 30 April 2020 regarding priority claim submission, additional document submission of responses toward NOIP, notification decision, submission of new trademark patent design, submission of any appeal petition until 30 May 2020. In the meantime, all the office at NOIP in Hanoi, Da Nang, and Ho Chi Minh are closed until further notice. So that's all the situation in Vietnam right now.
Thank you, Fern. It's very useful to know the different initiatives that's been announced and how transportation is halted. And it sounds like you do have a kind of a almost like full lockdown there to try to contain with a country that's so highly populous. We now move to the second part of this virtual roundtable where we talk about some client issues, and we only have 20 minutes left. So I want to invite my panelists to please keep your answers short. The first one on financial markets and stimulus, maybe Thailand. Connie, you mentioned that there is already, the stock exchange was down and now it's kind of picked up. Anything else that you want to add to that you've mentioned before?
Hello. Yeah. So far, okay, at the moment, I think yesterday the government just approved the 1.9 trillion baht stimulus package, or it can be equivalent to 58 billion US dollar. Yeah, to promote the business at the moment. So that one is actually some part is actually for the stock market or for stock exchange, and some is actually given to the health and safety for the medical device related to the COVID-19 thing. Yeah, and yeah, so far I think so
is there a place where clients can go and link or website to find out how to get the stimulus package, such a huge amount?
There at the moment, there is the website is like that the people can go to register, do the registration, like for parts of the budget. Some is actually provide to the SME soft loan, and some of the budget is actually provide to the freelance. They can get like 5,000 baht per month for 6 months. And also, some of them is the plan to inject the fund to the SME, and some policy is kind of like try to give some postpones of the payment and interest for the SME business. Yeah,
that's good. That's good. I think useful if we can provide a link to that on our chat group, Queen, so that if anybody wants to access to find out how to avail themselves of the stimulus plan, that they can do so. What about Vietnam, Phung? Any special packages, stimulus, stock exchange?
Yes, out of the case of Vietnam, COVID-19 firstly had impact on the Asian tourism and service industry, followed by the trade and investment, and then manufacturing disruption. As you know, Vietnam economic rely heavily on export, and according to the latest, figure that I have, for the first 2 months of 2020, after closing the border with China, strictly tightening import with many highly virus affected countries, total revenue from import and export type were estimated at $2.17 billion, down nearly 8% in compared with the same period of 2019. So the government recently applied, in track actually the State Bank of Vietnam to think about the credit support to all the enterprises who affected by this COVID, and then the four main method that we apply, that repayment of the schedule of the debt payment, and then they can exempt or reduce the interest rates, and then they keep the the classification of the debt group, and then they have some credit and facility supported package to enterprises, especially who affected by the COVID-19. The stock market, we some of the day we have the keep at it is, but almost of the time everything is decreased.
Thank you, Feng. Another question that we get from clients is on the general shell meeting of shareholders. How can that be convened now that we have social distancing measures and people are working from home and offices are closed? Maybe Aris, can you share what's the position, anything that's been passed or any determinations in Laos?
Yes, so the main legislation on shareholders and board meeting is the amended enterprise law. In the law, board meetings, AGM, and general meetings can be done by electronic means through informal meetings. However, for shareholders, that's quite an issue on the articles, because the articles requires a physical meeting. However, one can be able to provide certain avenues in view of the current situation. Like, for example, the first option would be having assigned proxies with the right to vote, who can have a physical meeting in the place that they should have an AGM or an extraordinary meeting. So in this first option, of course, there's still a requirement for some sort of physical meeting by proxies. In the second option would be to have a failed quorum for the first time and having a second quorum meeting without maintaining the required quorum. And in this case, you can have, for example, one shareholder or their proxies in that, you could say, failed quorum meeting and be joined in by other shareholders through electronic means. In this second option, this is not expressly provided by the amended enterprise law. However, the risks with this second option can be minimized if all the shareholders would unanimously waive any requirements of the law and approve the resolutions to be adopted. In this case, there's also still some sort of uncertainty with the regulators, because this is not something common for the Lao. I think in terms of the legislations, whether it's corporate law or other legislations, it's really necessary now in this new age to have some sort of amendments to have to cope with the electronic or other communication means. And it's worth noting that we understand in Germany, they have adopted this already with the amendments of their corporate law, wherein they have, with their own initiative, allowed executive board meetings without physical meetings, and have provided means to post questions and vote by electronic means. And they don't have to amend their articles of association to be able for this legislation to be effective and used by all enterprises. Of course, this has, we understand in Germany, this has been limited for only until the end of the year. But it's good to have these provisions be also recognized in the future to cope up with the new situation.
Thanks. This is when we see how fast our legislation work. I think in some of these more developed countries, they work pretty fast. I believe in Australia as well, there was a laws have been passed on 25th of March for certain provisions that override the normal provisions to allow for this pandemic situation. Let's move on to another hot topic that clients bring up on supply contract termination. Can force majeure be invoked due to this pandemic? Let's move to the colleague in Geraldine in Myanmar to give comment on the FM provisions there, or what's the interpretation? Have you seen this question?
Hi, thanks, Hanim. So we have actually, I've just received a query on this morning. So Myanmar being a common law jurisdiction, what it means is that it's primarily based on the contractual clauses, and it may differ thereafter from case to case depending on what's actually written in the contract. But generally, provisions would include wording, for example, events that cannot be foreseen, prevented, or controlled, even if the word pandemic is not specifically mentioned. But we've seen that clients are relying on sort of those general provisions. And how that would affect their current businesses is, number one, they are deferring on any of their obligations that have been affected by the FM event, in this case, the pandemic, and moving forward next week would be the lockdown period. So that's only in relation to deferments, but of course, if there are other effects which would actually affect the performance of the contract in its entirety, we can rely actually on Section 56 of the Contracts Act. Locally in Myanmar, it is also based on a common law, English law, which is actually the doctrine of frustration. So that will obviously be a sort of an extreme measure, because it's only if a contract becomes unlawful or becomes void or impossible to perform. That's the statutory wording that's under the Contracts Act. Interestingly, for case studies, is that there have actually been a lot of large power projects that were slated to be completed in the summer, which is now. During the hot season, Myanmar still suffers electricity issues. We are only about 50% electrification rate. So some of these new power plants that were due to come up was actually to service this period. April, May, June is when we will see the peak of power cuts. And they haven't been able to complete because of, firstly, the China situation, where some of these power contracts are actually done by Chinese EPC contractors and Chinese bidding companies. So there's a big question mark whether the government in Myanmar will actually be imposing very, very hefty fines. This has been reported in the media of approximately $300,000 per day of just for LD. So it remains to be seen how those issues will be resolved. But yes, we've definitely force majeure is now being used even in commercial sense by some of our clients. Thanks,
Thank
Annette.
you, Geraldine. I think, yeah, I would like to also pose the same question to Matthew with regards to the Cambodia position on any kind of interpretation of FM clauses, and if he's seen a termination based on the pandemic. Matt?
Yeah, it's an issue here. Cambodia, different to Geraldine, Cambodia is a civil law country. So, but even so, unless you've got a force majeure clause in your contract, it's going to be difficult to use this pandemic as a reason. And again, that whether your force majeure clause specifies pandemic, I'm sure going forward they will. But whether in the past people have thought to put pandemic in as one of the force majeure events. The Cambodian Civil Code actually does on two specific occurrences reference a force majeure, and it's both to do with leases. One is a perpetual lease, something longer than 15 years. They refer to if the purpose of the lease is no longer or the rent amount is no longer appropriate given circumstances, you can ask for that a court to rectify that. They reference force majeure. And secondly, in commercial leases, it references if your profit is such that it's not, in essence, it's not enough to cover the rental amount, you can ask for the rental amount to be adjusted to accommodate that. And if it goes on for 2 years, it's a reason for cancelling the lease. Now, bear in mind, though, I think these provisions have not been tested. The Civil Code is fairly new in Cambodia. I'd be very surprised if those specific provisions have been tested. So you'd certainly need to sort of seek legal advice as to whether it's appropriate and what constitutes an act of force majeure for the purpose of those clauses, because the Civil Code has no definition. Its explanatory notes reference an event that's unpredictable and invincible, whatever that's meant to mean. But it is a direct reference to force majeure, but only in those two types of contracts. We get the question, particularly in property developers who have offered a guaranteed rental return to buyers who are then taken over the management and in turn are renting their units to shopkeepers usually. There, of course, now that business may have dried up and they're asking whether or not they can invoke force majeure to not enforce the guaranteed rental return provision. So we're working with some clients right now on that issue. as we speak. But that's where I've seen it personally, is in those particular contracts. People ask the question in a general sense. Our response to that is, I mean, I don't know if you could just invoke the pandemic per se. I think if there is an event as a shutdown, for example, of your business, then that's the act that's force majeure, not the pandemic per se. So if the government, for example, is closed KTV bars, is closed casinos. So on that basis, if you're a supplier to those and your business by law cannot operate, then I think that's probably a valid argument. That's an act of force majeure. But it is the government act of shutting down, not the pandemic per se. But yes, we're seeing the question a bit like Geraldine, that there's no real, the law can't help you. It's what it is written in your contract, and you're going to have to work with that and basically work with your supplier, work with your contracting partner, I think.
Thanks, Matt. I think like 9/11 were act of terrorism and became, you know, kind of a definition of force majeure pandemic. I think you are right. We will see more and more of that in our contracts. The last question that I think that we see from clients is on, can actually employers cut the pay of their employees? Are there laws prohibiting that in your country? Yes, no answers would be great, because we're about 4 minutes up to the hour. Can employers just, you know, cut pay of employees? Are there laws prohibiting that in your country? We go from Vietnam, Phung. Yes, no, can employers just cut because of the current situation?
Yes, actually, the official language of the new, guideline decision to issue by Ministry of Labor. They said that employee who stop performing the job under the labor contract due to epidemic isolation, if causing damage, shall not pay compensation. You know. But the guideline saying that, you know, the employee and employer can negotiate on how much they will get paid from the employee, and then it's not lower than the reasonable minimum wage, you know. And then the currently the minimum wage is defined something like 4 million, nearly 4 million Vietnamese dong, which equivalent to the $180 per month.
Thank you. Well, that is eye-opening, I think, for companies to know that there is an avenue to discuss and negotiate. Because last week during our virtual webinar, I think Indonesia, many of the countries mentioned that you cannot, and it's very difficult. You need to agree. Both parties must agree, or you need to then invoke termination provisions, which will be difficult. How about Thailand, Connie? Can employers just cut salaries?
Yeah. So under this situation is we have to look at, it depends on the situation. Let's say because we under employment law, we actually under the principle of no work, no pay, and also at the moment, if any activity that is affected on the semi-lockdown from the government, like for the shopping mall, spa, club, or activity that are not allowed to open during this period. In that case, it's actually you can just like not pay the salary to your employee. But however, for the activity that not directly impact from the semi lockdown, that one you actually need to do the negotiation with your employee, because to do the pay cut, you actually need to get the consent from your employees. And also for some business activity, they actually can make the arrangement to have the employee to voluntarily apply the unpaid leave. That is another option for the employee as well. Yeah.
Thank you. That's quite robust as well. Geraldine, in Myanmar?
Thanks, Hanim. So in Myanmar, it's actually a contractual position between employer and employee. It's a contractual relationship, and therefore there cannot be any unilateral one-sided cut by the employer. If and so they do it, it's actually by consent, and procedurally they can't do it because they actually have to register the amended or employment contract between employer and employee. So that's basically contractual or consensus.
Aris, Lau?
For Lao, the amended labor law does not provide for salary deduction, forced leave, unpaid leave, It has only provision for employers who are affected by the suspension that they are required to pay an equivalent of 50% of the salary of the employees. However, there's also a provision that if the employer and employee agrees, then it may be provided for.
A lot of this can require agreement of both parties. Cambodia, is that the same situation as well, Matt?
It is, except in the garment sector and tourism sector. So the government has invoked a directive that in the garment sector, they will bring in a $70 wage. It's $190 minimum wage, of which the government will subsidize $40 of that and the employer $30 that for those factories that have been suspended. So where there is a suspension of activities entirely, you can go to this $70 salary. Otherwise, like every other country, it has to be by agreement now.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, it's tough, a two-edged sword. Well, you know, we want to maintain companies that cannot perform. Employees also need, of course, their salaries in order to continue living comfortably. And that's where the stimulus packages, I hope, you know, with easy access, people can get their hands to that. I hope this has been a useful webinar for everyone. There was one question whether ZICO was still receiving the same number of inquiries. Some officers are still very busy, as you've heard from my colleagues, and the questions that we are asked are those that we've been discussing this afternoon, and I hope you've got some benefit out of that. Next week, our webinar will be focusing deep dive on employment issues, labor. So we'll have all our employment experts, I think from 4 out of 10 countries, speaking at 12 noon. This is our weekly Wednesday webinars from ZICO Law from this COVID-19 pandemic situation. I thank you for your participation and your questions. If you leave your name, there will be a recording that we'll share with you that you can listen to at your convenience. So thanks again, and also to the team at the back end helping out on the webinar. Thank you guys, and we're switching off from here.